airport terminal thrummed with the familiar chaos of hurried passengers, the rolling of luggage wheels, and the constant announcements over the PA system. Amid the crowd, Gregory Sullivan, a sharp-witted entrepreneur in his early 60s, approached the boarding gate for Polaris Air, an airline he had painstakingly built from scratch. Dressed in casual attire, a light blue button-up shirt, and comfortable jeans, Gregory's most striking feature was the bold red hat perched on his head. Emblazoned across it were 4 unmistakable letters: MAGA. Gregory wasn't one to shy away from expressing his beliefs, but he wore the hat not to provoke but as a personal emblem of his journey, one that had been marked by determination, grit, and unapologetic individuality. He approached the gate agent with a calm demeanor, offering a polite nod as his boarding pass was scanned. If the agent suspected Gregory was anything other than another traveler, they didn't show it. So, he asked, we should have he was just another passenger heading to his next destination, or so everyone assumed. Gregory's plan was simple: attend a pivotal business conference where key decisions about the airline's future would be made. As he walked onto the aircraft, he felt the same pride he always did when flying on Polaris Air. Every detail, from the cabin design to the staff's training, bore his touch. Settling into his first-class seat, Gregory placed his carry-on bag in the overhead bin and sat down, pulling out his tablet to review conference notes. Ended up pulling out his tablet to review conference notes. A few rows back, however, trouble was brewing. Eleanor Tate, a woman in her late 40s with a self-assured air and a habit of speaking her mind, had noticed Gregory's hat. Her face tightened into a scowl as she leaned toward the passenger beside her, her voice laced with disdain. "Can you believe someone would wear that in public?" she whispered, making no effort to lower her voice. "It's an insult, flaunting that kind of hatred for everyone to see." Her seatmate, visibly uncomfortable, muttered a non-committal response before returning to their book. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She stared at Gregory with a glare that could pierce steel, her irritation simmering into a plan of action. When the flight attendants began their pre-departure checks, Eleanor pressed her call button with dramatic urgency. Moments later, a young and composed flight attendant named Rachel Hayes approached her. "How can I assist you, ma'am?" Rachel asked with a professional smile. "That man," Eleanor said sharply, pointing toward Gregory, "is wearing a MAGA hat. It's offensive and makes me feel unsafe. You need to do something about it." Rachel blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Years of training had prepared her to handle a wide range of passenger concerns. But this was unexpected. She composed herself quickly and replied, "I'm sorry you feel that way, ma'am. Let me see what I can do." Rachel made her way toward Gregory, her steps measured and her expression neutral. Observing him before speaking, she noticed he was entirely engrossed in his tablet, his demeanor calm and focused. Clearing her throat, she addressed him politely. "Excuse me, sir, I am Rachel, one of the flight attendants. A passenger has expressed concerns about your hat. Would you mind removing it to help maintain a comfortable environment for everyone on board?" Gregory looked up, his expression one of mild surprise. "I don't see how my hat could be causing discomfort," he said evenly. "I'm just here to travel like everyone else." Rachel hesitated, sensing that this would not be a simple matter. "I understand, sir," she replied, "but we aim to ensure all passengers feel safe and comfortable." Gregory nodded slowly, his voice calm but resolute. "And I appreciate that. But I'm not violating any airline policies, and I don't believe my hat is threatening anyone's safety." Rachel could see this wasn't a matter that would be easily resolved. With a polite nod, she excused herself and returned to the galley, where she relayed the situation to Lisa, the senior flight attendant. Lisa's response was immediate and firm. "We can't have passengers feeling unsafe," she said. "I'll handle it." Eleanor, meanwhile, was reveling in her sense of righteous indignation. She glanced around the cabin, gauging the reactions of other passengers. A few nodded in silent agreement. Others looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Eleanor's voice grew louder. "This is what happens when we let this kind of behavior go unchecked," she declared. "It's disgraceful. But no one is ready to take responsibility, and Eclipse is out of control." Lisa approached Gregory with authority. "Sir," she began, I need to ask you again to remove your hat. Passengers have expressed concerns. Gregory set his tablet aside, his calm demeanor unwavering. I'm sorry, he said, but I'm not taking it off. I've done nothing wrong. Lisa's expression hardened. If you refuse to comply, we'll have to ask you to leave the plane. Gregory's response was steady. Then do what you have to do. Lisa turned and called for airport security, her decision prompting whispers and uneasy glances from the passengers. Eleanor's triumphant smirk did not go unnoticed as the officers entered the cabin and approached Gregory. Sir, one officer said, his tone measured, we've been informed of a situation. We need you to come with us. Gregory stood calmly, his movements deliberate. I expect a full explanation of why this is happening, he said, collecting his belongings. As Gregory walked down the aisle, he turned to address the cabin. Remember this moment, he said, his voice firm but calm. It's a lesson in how assumptions and prejudice can strip away dignity. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some felt a pang of regret. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. Gregory exited the plane, leaving behind a cabin filled with silence and tension. Outside, he pulled out his phone and made a call. I need a meeting with the regional director immediately, he said to his assistant. And get me the names of everyone involved in this incident. What none of them realized was that the man they had just removed wasn't just any passenger. He was the CEO of Polaris Air, and this was far from over. Gregory Sullivan stepped off the plane, his steps steady and purposeful despite the humiliation he had just endured. As he walked through the terminal, the hum of the crowd faded into background noise. His thoughts were already on the road ahead. This wasn't the first time he'd faced challenges born out of assumptions, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. What mattered now was how he responded. Pulling out his phone, Gregory quickly dialed his executive assistant. Danielle, he said, his voice measured but firm. I need the PR team prepped immediately. Call a full leadership meeting for tonight, remote or in person, I don't care. I also want every piece of footage from that flight reviewed. Have someone check if we have passengers who might be willing to speak on record about what they saw. Danielle didn't ask questions. She never did. Understood, she replied. Anything else? Gregory paused, his sharp eyes scanning the bustling terminal. Yes. Make sure we send a clear message. This isn't about me. It's about who we are as a company and what we stand for. As he ended the call, Gregory noticed a young woman standing nearby, her phone in hand. Her wide eyes and hesitant steps told him she recognized him. She approached cautiously. Mr. Sullivan, she asked, her voice uncertain but earnest. I saw what happened on the plane. It didn't feel right. I just wanted to say I'm sorry you had to go through that. Gregory smiled warmly, the kind of smile that disarmed even the most skeptical of critics. Thank you, he said, but it's not your fault. What matters is that we learn from this, myself included. The woman hesitated, then spoke again. For what it's worth, I recorded part of it. I wasn't sure if I should share it, but after seeing how things unfolded, I feel like people need to see the truth. Gregory's expression shifted slightly, his interest peaked. I'd appreciate it if you could send me that footage, he said, handing her his business card. Transparency is key, and sometimes that means showing the good, the bad, and the ugly. The woman nodded, her confidence growing. Of course, I'll send it over tonight. As Gregory walked away, he felt a flicker of reassurance. Despite the chaos, there were still those who valued fairness and accountability. Later that evening, the boardroom at Polaris Air's headquarters was abuzz with tension. Executives and department heads gathered around the long table, their expressions a mix of concern and anticipation. At the head of the table sat Gregory, his MAGA hat conspicuously absent, but his presence commanding as ever. Let's not waste time, he began, his tone calm but authoritative. What happened today wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was a failure of our values. I need to understand where we went wrong. Michael Green, the regional director, cleared his throat. Mr. Sullivan, I've already initiated a full review of the policies and procedures involved. It seems the crew acted out of an abundance of caution. But Gregory held up a hand, silencing him. Michael, I'm not interested in excuses. I want solutions. How do we prevent this from happening again? Not just to me, but to any passenger. The room fell silent. Finally, one of the HR managers spoke up. We need to start with training, she said. Not just the basics, but comprehensive education on implicit bias, de-escalation tactics, and handling unconventional situations. Gregory nodded. Good. What else? Another executive hesitated before speaking. We also need to reevaluate our complaint protocols. Right now, any passenger can raise a concern, and it's treated as gospel. There has to be a process for assessing the validity of complaints before acting. Agreed, Gregory said. But let me be clear, this isn't about undermining our commitment to safety or inclusivity. It's about balance. We need to ensure that we're protecting the rights and dignity of everyone on board, not just the loudest voices. As the meeting continued, the ideas flowed freely, and Gregory felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just damage control, it was an opportunity to redefine the company's culture from the ground up. Meanwhile, the fallout from the incident had already begun to spread across social media. Clips of Gregory's calm demeanor and eloquent departure were juxtaposed with the crew's handling of the situation and Eleanor's smug comments. The public reaction was swift and polarized. Some praised Gregory for his composure and dignity, while others criticized Polaris Air for bowing to bias and pressure. By the next morning, major news outlets had picked up the story. Headlines ranged from CEO removed from his own airline to MAGA hat sparks controversy on Polaris Air flight. Public opinion was fiercely divided, with heated debates erupting across social media platforms. Eleanor, too, found herself unexpectedly thrust into the spotlight. Her face, captured in the viral videos, became a symbol for some of self-righteousness, and for others of standing up for personal beliefs. But the attention wasn't all positive. As her actions were dissected online, she began receiving messages, some supportive, others harshly critical. Feeling the pressure, Eleanor decided to speak out. She granted an interview to a local news station where she defended her actions. I acted out of concern for the comfort and safety of everyone on that plane, she said, her voice measured but defensive. It's not about politics. It's about creating a space where everyone feels respected. But the interviewer, armed with clips from the incident, pressed her. Do you feel you respected Mr. Sullivan's rights in the process? Eleanor hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. I believe I acted with the best intentions. The interview only added fuel to the fire, further polarizing the debate. Back at Polaris Air, the changes Gregory had initiated were already taking shape. A series of training workshops were scheduled for all employees, and the new complaint protocol was being finalized. Gregory personally oversaw the implementation of these reforms, ensuring they aligned with the company's core values. One afternoon, while reviewing a draft of the new training manual, Gregory received an unexpected visitor. Rachel Hayes, the flight attendant who had first approached him on the plane, stood nervously at his office door. Mr. Sullivan, she began, her voice shaking slightly, I wanted to apologize. I didn't handle the situation as well as I could have. I let the pressure get to me. Gregory studied her for a moment before speaking. Rachel, it takes courage to admit when you're wrong. What matters now is how you grow from this. I've already started the new training program, she said. I want to make sure this doesn't happen again, not to anyone. Gregory smiled. That's all I can ask. Keep learning, and don't be afraid to stand up for what's right, even if it means going against the grain. As Rachel left, Gregory felt a glimmer of hope. Change was never easy, but it was moments like this that reminded him why it was worth pursuing. Weeks later, Gregory found himself boarding another Polaris Air flight. This time, the atmosphere felt markedly different. The crew greeted him with warm smiles, and the passengers seemed more relaxed. As he settled into his seat, Gregory couldn't help but notice a subtle shift in the energy of the cabin. The tension and unease that had defined his previous flight were replaced with a sense of calm professionalism. During the flight, a young man seated across the aisle leaned over. "Excuse me," he said, his voice filled with curiosity. "Are you Gregory Sullivan?" Gregory nodded. "I am." The man smiled. "I just wanted to say thank you. I read about what happened and how you handled it. It's inspiring to see someone turn a negative experience into something positive." Gregory's smile was genuine. "Thank you. It's a team effort, though. The real work happens behind the scenes." As the plane touched down, Gregory felt a sense of fulfillment. The incident had been a painful lesson, but it had also sparked a cultural shift within Polaris Air. The company was stronger, more united, and better prepared to face the challenges of an ever-changing world. For Gregory, the journey wasn't just about running a successful airline. It was about creating an environment where respect and understanding could thrive, a legacy far greater than any business achievement. Gregory Sullivan stood in the midst of his penthouse office, staring out at the city skyline as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The glow of the setting sun reflected off the polished glass, casting warm, golden light across the room. His thoughts were elsewhere, however, on the whirlwind of events since the flight. While the public attention had sparked much-needed conversations about fairness and inclusivity, it had also exposed vulnerabilities within the company he had worked so hard to build. A sharp knock on the door broke his reverie. It was Danielle, his ever-efficient executive assistant, clutching a folder in one hand and her tablet in the other. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, stepping inside, "we've received over 1,000 messages from customers. Most of them are supportive, but there's also a vocal group accusing Polaris Air of being complicit in what happened." Gregory turned to face her. "What about our employees? What's the sentiment internally?" Danielle hesitated. "Mixed. The changes you've implemented have been well received by some, but others feel uneasy. They think the training and new protocols might come across as an overcorrection." Gregory nodded thoughtfully. "It's always a balancing act, Danielle. But growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from challenging what we think we know." Danielle placed the folder on his desk. "I also pulled some insights from our competitors. They've been quick to capitalize on the controversy, subtly highlighting their own inclusivity policies." A faint smile tugged at Gregory's lips. "Of course they have. Adversity has a way of attracting opportunists." He picked up the folder and flipped through its contents. "Let them. We're not just reacting. We're building something better." Meanwhile, Eleanor Tate was facing her own set of challenges. The viral attention she'd received after the flight had turned her life upside down. What had started as a moment of moral indignation had spiraled into something far beyond her control. Supporters of Gregory and Polaris Air had flooded her social media accounts with harsh comments, calling her intolerant, a bully, and worse. Even some of her friends had begun distancing themselves, uncomfortable with the attention she'd brought upon herself. Feeling cornered, Eleanor decided to confront the issue head-on. She organized a public forum in her hometown, inviting anyone interested to come and discuss the broader issues of free speech and inclusivity. She believed this would be an opportunity to tell her side of the story and reclaim some semblance of control. The forum, held at a local community center, attracted a mix of supporters, critics, and curious onlookers. Eleanor began by recounting her perspective of the incident, emphasizing her belief that she had acted in the best interest of the other passengers. "I wasn't trying to create conflict," she said, her voice steady but defensive. "I genuinely felt that the presence of that hat made the environment uncomfortable for many of us." A hand shot up from the audience. The speaker, a young woman with short, brightly colored hair, stood and addressed Eleanor directly. "Don't you think that discomfort is a part of free speech?" she asked. "Just because something makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean it's harmful. Isn't it better to have a conversation than to try to silence someone?" Eleanor faltered, the weight of the question hanging in the air. "I see your point," she said cautiously. "But there's a line where discomfort turns into harm, and I thought that line had been crossed." The discussion continued, with members of the audience debating passionately. Some defended Eleanor, while others criticized her for jumping to conclusions. The event, though tense at times, highlighted the complexity of the issue. For Eleanor, it was a sobering reminder that her actions had far-reaching consequences, and that her interpretation of the situation wasn't as universally accepted as she'd believed. Back at Polaris Air, the first round of mandatory training sessions was underway. Rachel Hayes, the young flight attendant who had first approached Gregory on the flight, sat in a conference room alongside her colleagues. The training was unlike anything she had experienced before. Instead of the usual lectures on compliance and customer service, it focused on empathy, active listening, and implicit bias. One exercise stood out to Rachel. Each participant was asked to share a moment when they had felt judged or misunderstood. As she listened to her colleagues' stories, Rachel began to see how easily assumptions could cloud judgment, even with the best intentions. When it was her turn to speak, Rachel hesitated. She hadn't planned to share, but something compelled her to speak up. "I didn't agree with how the situation on that flight was handled," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I didn't know how to challenge it without overstepping. I froze because I was scared. Scared of making things worse, scared of getting it wrong." Her honesty was met with nods of understanding. One of the facilitators, an experienced mediator named Priya, offered words of encouragement. "Fear is natural, Rachel," she said gently. "But fear can also be a guide. It shows us where we have room to grow. The fact that you're reflecting on it means you're already moving forward." Rachel left the session feeling lighter, as though a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted. For the first time in weeks, she felt hopeful, not just for herself, but for the company as a whole. Gregory's reforms extended beyond internal changes. He began working with external organizations to develop partnerships that would reinforce Polaris Air's commitment to inclusivity and respect. One such partnership was with a nonprofit that specialized in conflict resolution training for corporations. The nonprofit's founder, a charismatic former diplomat named Adrian Chen, quickly became a key advisor to Gregory. During a meeting at Polaris Air's headquarters, Adrian shared a powerful insight. "What happened on that flight wasn't just about a hat," he said. "It was about the assumptions we make about each other. Those assumptions can be small, almost invisible, but they shape how we interact in profound ways. If you can address that, Gregory, you won't just be fixing a company problem, you'll be leading a cultural shift." Gregory leaned back in his chair, considering Adrian's words. "A cultural shift," he repeated. "That's exactly what we need." The two men spent hours brainstorming ways to integrate these principles into Polaris Air's operations, from the hiring process to passenger interactions. By the end of the meeting, Gregory felt more inspired than ever. In the weeks that followed, the changes began to bear fruit. Customer satisfaction scores steadily climbed, and employees reported feeling more empowered to address conflicts constructively. Even passengers began to notice the difference, with many commenting on the improved atmosphere during their flights. One day, while visiting a training session unannounced, Gregory observed as a group of employees role-played a difficult passenger interaction. The scenario mirrored the incident on his flight, but this time, the crew's responses were calm, measured, and solution-focused. Watching them, Gregory felt a swell of pride, so happy that Torn has been resolved in that fashion. So happy that Torn has been resolved in that fashion. Later, as he prepared to leave, one of the employees approached him. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "thank you for investing in us. It means a lot to know that you believe in our ability to grow." Gregory smiled. "It's not just about belief," he said. "It's about action, and you're proving that every day." As he drove home that evening, Gregory thought about how far the company had come and how much further it could go. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but he was ready for them. After all, growth didn't come from comfort. It came from pushing boundaries, learning from mistakes, and striving to be better. And Polaris Air, under Gregory's steady leadership, was ready to soar. As the weeks turned into months, Polaris Air's transformation became a case study in the aviation industry. Gregory Sullivan's decisive actions had turned a moment of public scrutiny into a defining chapter in the company's history. However, the road to rebuilding trust wasn't without its challenges, and as the reforms deepened, so did the complexity of their implementation. One particularly thorny issue was revising the passenger complaint policy. While the new protocols provided clearer guidelines, the balance between passenger comfort and fairness remained elusive. This tension came to a head during a leadership summit Gregory organized to address lingering concerns. The summit brought together a mix of executives, crew members, and external advisors, including Adrian Chen. Held at a sleek conference center near the Polaris Air headquarters, the event was designed to foster open dialogue and brainstorming. Gregory opened the session with a simple question: "What would you do if you were in my shoes?" The responses varied. Some attendees emphasized the importance of maintaining strict guidelines to avoid future incidents. Others argued for greater flexibility, stressing the need for human judgment over rigid procedures. As the discussion unfolded, an unexpected voice cut through the noise. Rachel, now a key advocate for inclusivity within the company, had been invited to share her perspective as a frontline employee. She stood, her hands clasped nervously, but her voice was steady. "I think we need to ask ourselves why complaints like the one on that flight gain so much traction," she began. "Is it because we don't trust our crew to make the right call? Or is it because we've created an environment where people feel entitled to demand immediate action, no matter the circumstances?" Her words resonated deeply, prompting a ripple of nods around the room. Adrian leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You've hit on something important," he said. "Entitlement and urgency are a dangerous combination. We need to shift the focus from reacting to..." The room buzzed with new energy as the group brainstormed practical steps. By the end of the day, a new framework had emerged, a tiered response system that prioritized de-escalation and resolution over immediate action. Gregory approved the plan on the spot, impressed by the collaborative effort. Beyond the internal changes, Gregory recognized the need to repair Polaris Air's public image. He enlisted a prominent advertising firm to create a campaign that highlighted the company's commitment to growth and inclusivity. The centerpiece of the campaign was a heartfelt commercial titled "A Journey Together," which featured real Polaris Air employees and customers sharing their stories. The ad opened with a montage of passengers boarding planes, their faces a tapestry of different backgrounds and experiences. As a soft piano melody played, the narrator's voice, warm and reassuring, spoke of the power of connection. "At Polaris Air, we believe that every journey begins with respect," the voice said. "Respect for where you've been, where you're going, and who you are." The commercial concluded with a shot of Gregory standing on the tarmac, the company's signature blue and silver plane behind him. He looked directly into the camera, his expression sincere. "We're not perfect," he said, "but we're committed to being better. For you, for us, and for the future." The campaign launched to widespread acclaim, striking a chord with viewers. Social media lit up with praise for the ad's authenticity, and customer sentiment began to shift in favor of Polaris Air. Even critics acknowledged the company's efforts to turn the page. Amid the external successes, Gregory also took time to reflect on his personal journey. The incident on the flight had forced him to confront not only systemic issues within his company, but also his own vulnerabilities as a leader. He began keeping a journal, documenting his thoughts and lessons learned. One evening, while reviewing his entries, Gregory noticed a recurring theme: resilience. Time and again, he had written about the importance of staying true to one's values, even in the face of adversity. Inspired by this realization, he decided to share his reflections more broadly. The result was a keynote speech Gregory delivered at a global leadership conference. Standing before a packed auditorium, he recounted the events of the flight with unflinching honesty. "I wore a hat that day because it represented my beliefs," he said. "But what I didn't realize was that it also represented something bigger, a conversation we need to have about assumptions, respect, and the courage to stand up for what's right." The audience listened intently as Gregory outlined the steps Polaris Air had taken to address its shortcomings. He emphasized that the journey was far from over, but expressed confidence in the company's direction. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What defines us is how we respond. Do we bury our heads in the sand, or do we face the truth and work to make it right?" The speech earned Gregory a standing ovation, and excerpts were widely shared online, further solidifying his reputation as a principled and forward-thinking leader. Meanwhile, Eleanor Tate's journey took an unexpected turn. The public backlash had subsided somewhat, but her reputation remained tarnished. Determined to rebuild her credibility, she began volunteering at a local community center that focused on conflict resolution and mediation. The work was humbling but rewarding, offering her a fresh perspective on the importance of understanding different viewpoints. Volunteering at a local culinary gallery convened a small crowd and asked to work, her reputation began to brighten on the mat. Volunteering during one of the center's workshops, Eleanor shared her story with a group of participants. "I thought I was standing up for what was right," she admitted. "But in trying to make my voice heard, I silenced someone else's. I see now that respect has to go both ways." Her candor resonated with the group, sparking a lively discussion about the complexities of navigating personal beliefs in shared spaces. For Eleanor, the experience was a step toward redemption and a reminder that growth often comes from uncomfortable truths. Back at Polaris Air, Gregory's efforts to foster a culture of accountability and inclusivity were beginning to yield long-term benefits. Employee engagement surveys showed a marked improvement, and customer feedback highlighted the positive changes in the company's approach. One day, as Gregory prepared for a meeting, Danielle entered his office with a rare smile. "You're going to want to see this," she said, handing him a tablet. Gregory glanced at the screen, which displayed a letter from a longtime customer. The letter recounted a recent flight where the crew had gone above and beyond to address a passenger's concern with empathy and professionalism. "It felt like a different airline," the letter read. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Gregory set the tablet down, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over him. The journey had been anything but easy, but moments like this reminded him why it was worth it. As he looked out the window, the city skyline bathed in golden light once again, Gregory felt a renewed sense of purpose. Polaris Air wasn't just an airline, it was a symbol of resilience, growth, and the power of standing firm in one's beliefs. And for Gregory, the journey was far from over. There were still mountains to climb, challenges to face, and lessons to learn. But as he gazed at the horizon, he knew one thing for certain: he was ready. As Polaris Air continued its transformation, Gregory Sullivan sought to expand the company's impact beyond just its operations. He envisioned a role for Polaris that extended into broader social initiatives, efforts that would bridge divides, foster understanding, and strengthen the community. This vision led to the creation of the Polaris Foundation, a nonprofit arm of the airline focused on promoting dialogue, education, and equity. The Foundation's first major initiative was a scholarship program aimed at underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation. Gregory wanted the next generation of airline professionals to reflect the diversity of the passengers they served. The scholarships would cover tuition, mentorship, and internships, creating pathways for students who might not otherwise have had the opportunity to enter the industry. At the launch event, held in a large hangar repurposed into an elegant venue, Gregory stood on a makeshift stage before a crowd of students, educators, and community leaders. Behind him, a sleek Polaris Air jet served as a symbol of aspiration and progress. "This foundation is more than a gesture," Gregory began, his voice resonating with conviction. "It's a commitment, a promise, that Polaris Air will not only serve its passengers, but also invest in the people who will shape the future of this industry." Among the attendees was a young man named Amir, a high school senior with dreams of becoming a pilot. Amir had grown up near the airport, watching planes take off and land, but financial hardships had always made his dream feel out of reach. Hearing Gregory speak, he felt a spark of hope. After the event, Amir approached Gregory, his hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, "thank you for giving people like me a chance. I've always wanted to fly, but I never thought it could be possible." Gregory smiled, placing a reassuring hand on Amir's shoulder. "Dreams don't have to stay dreams, Amir. You have the potential. Now it's up to you to put in the work. And when you do, Polaris will be here to help." In addition to the scholarship program, the Polaris Foundation launched a nationwide campaign called Wings of Unity, which brought together people from diverse backgrounds to share their stories in facilitated workshops. The campaign's goal was to highlight the common threads that connected individuals even when their perspectives differed. Gregory believed that these conversations, though sometimes uncomfortable, were essential for building a more inclusive world. One of the most powerful workshops took place in a city still reeling from recent social tensions. The participants included community leaders, activists, business owners, and everyday citizens. As they shared their experiences, the group discovered surprising overlaps in their stories. Losses, hopes, fears, and aspirations that transcended the barriers dividing them. By the end of the workshop, there was a palpable shift in the room. People who had arrived with skepticism and guarded expressions left with handshakes, smiles, and a newfound appreciation for one another. Gregory, watching the workshop from the back of the room, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Polaris Air was no longer just an airline. It had become a force for connection, a bridge spanning divides, and a testament to what was possible when people chose understanding over judgment. Months later, as Gregory boarded a flight for a long overdue vacation, he was struck by a moment of quiet reflection. The airline had changed dramatically since that fateful day on Flight 271, but so had he. Gregory had always prided himself on resilience and determination, but this journey had taught him the value of humility, listening, and growth. As the plane ascended into the clouds, Gregory leaned back in his seat, a rare sense of peace washing over him. Polaris Air was soaring higher than ever, and its future felt boundless. The challenges they had faced had only made them stronger, proving that the greatest journeys are often the ones you never see coming. Thanks for watching. There's another incredible video waiting for you. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.